Welcome back, and I think one of the many things that we have been made perfectly clear after this morning and afternoon sessions is that we have many, many wonderful LGBT activists and allies both who are deep in the trenches with us, working to safeguard the rights we have and to lay the foundation for securing new ones. The next session continues to make that important point. So get ready to hear some incredibly smart, incredibly invested people who have taken up the issues, both organizationally and philanthropically, of the most vulnerable among us. Please welcome back to the stage now Tim Sweeney. And joining Tim Sweeney on stage are two women whose intelligence is matched by their kick-ass charisma. I mean it. The Vice President for Democracy, Rights, and Justice at the Ford Foundation, Maya Harris, and got her own music, I love that. She's with the Ford Foundation. And also, they've got their own thing now. And also, the Executive Director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, who's wearing an excellent Soji outfit and will be going to the Dinah Shore Golf Classic as soon as this little sucker's over. Please welcome Kate Kendall.
Woo! Looking good, Kate. So, for the next hour, we're going to discuss some of the defining national issues. These chairs really are funny, I just want to say. Some of the defining national issues that uniquely impact LGBT people. School climate, youth homelessness, healthcare access, immigration reform, and aging. And then we're going to end with a really incredible spotlight on the challenges and opportunities in international LGBT human rights. You know, all of the issues that we're about to talk about require multiple strategies to affect change and are so, so important to changing the everyday lives of some of our most vulnerable citizens. Now, in earlier sessions today, we talked and focused a lot on changing the laws and the rules under which we live. And that is absolutely vital. It is necessary for changing the lived experience of our people, but it is not sufficient. So let's talk about some of these larger challenges, and I'm thrilled that Kate and Maya are here with me. And Kate, I'm going to start with you. You know, as an organization, the National Center for Lesbian Rights has been at the forefront of the fight for legal equality, whether that's marriage or non-discrimination, anti-bullying. You all have done it all for a long time. But at the same time, NCLR has had specific programs that address the needs of seniors, of immigrants, of the transgender community. Your organization has had a social justice frame in your mission and work. Would you just tell us, what does that social justice frame mean, and why does NCLR use it?
Well, I think it was Jesse James who was asked, why do you rob banks? And his answer, of course, because that's where the money is. And for NCLR, that's where our clients are. This is where our community is. It is in all of these pockets of intersection of identities. And so, you know, many of you in this room and your peers are not the people that are going to be calling the legal advocacy organizations. I mean, every once in a while we may get a call from one of you or one of your peers, you know, needing some guidance or some assistance. But it's not you that the community organizations, the legal advocacy organizations are primarily there to serve, because you have access and privilege and means and attorneys and maybe educational privilege, geographic privilege, race privilege. So we're there, and the calls that we get are from the more vulnerable parts of our community, and many of those are people who live at some very toxic intersections based on their race, based on geography, based on class. So we started very early on. I mean, NCLR was founded in 1977, so I was when you very much started doing your work. And in 1977, the reason it was then the Lesbian Rights Project was founded was because there were issues being faced by lesbians that weren't being addressed. And these were, as you might imagine, mostly family issues. So women losing custody of their kids, some employment issues. But what started right away with the Lesbian Rights Project is that we went from representing lesbians facing those issues to representing gay men facing those issues. So from the very beginning, the animating features of the organization have been what issues are not being addressed, who's being left behind. And so we very quickly, you know, regardless, despite the name, have been representing the breadth of our community in these really vulnerable intersections, because that's where our community is.
Do you get any sort of resistance, or is there confusion about why you do such a broad swath of issues and how you, like right now, NCLR is doing incredible work along with the task force and others in promoting comprehensive immigration reform. Do people question you about like why that priority? What is that about?
You mean, do they write to us, why the fuck are you doing this?
Well, for instance.
Yeah. And it's interesting in this room. This is a really interesting room. This is a room that I take to be a room of members of the choir who understand everything that's been being discussed today and take it as a given that this is how we should do our work. That it has to be understanding these intersections, that we have to be about dropping silos. I mean, either you stand with that vision because that's where your values are, or you understand because you're sophisticated that that's where the political muscle is going to be, and in order to be where we want to be as a community, that's the work we have to be doing. But I will tell you, many of our fellow brothers and sisters in the LGBT community do not share any sense that we should be making alliances beyond something that they see as precisely an LGBT issue. And this is just, these questions have been raised very recently by people who I think should be much more sophisticated, asking questions openly on blogs. Is immigration an LGBT issue? And of course, it was a rhetorical question because embedded in the question was, well, it's really not. I mean, yes, it's an important issue, but it's really not our issue. And to be asking questions like that, and we get them all the time from members of our community, and sometimes very hostile, just like I worded it, exactly that kind of stuff, saying, don't send me your stuff anymore, I'm no longer going to support the organization, I'm definitely not supportive of what you're doing around immigration. But it could be other things. It could be our juvenile justice work around youth. Anything that doesn't feel to, mostly these are white, obviously, LGBT people, that this is a core LGBT issue, that is going to be their response. So we always try to engage in a dialogue about, but wait a minute, but it really is, and this is why. This is where our community is. We have individuals who are immigrants in our community. We have individuals, as we saw, 250,000 who are undocumented. But I really want it to be a more sophisticated conversation than that. I want it to be about answering the question, what kind of country do you want to live in? And in some way, we sort of owe, at this point, I think, a quid pro quo. Because we asked a lot of our fellow Americans in the last election in 4 states, what kind of state do you want to live in? What kind of country do you want to live in? And they answered by saying, I want to live in a state that supports the full equality of same-sex couples through marriage. And they did that not because they have a dog in the hunt. They may not even know someone who's gay. They may not have a gay family member. And it just feels to me that there is a gestalt that is happening that we want to be a part of on the edge of it that says we want to live in a country where everyone lives with dignity and opportunity. So it's a conversation I'm always willing to have, and I'm just happy that this is a room but that you are all going to be charged with having that conversation. Convincing you is not what we need to do.
So Maya, Ford is a multi-issue funder. You've entered the LGBT philanthropy with a formal program, $50 million over 5 years, by the way, and thank you to you and Serena and Luis and Urvashi and all those folks that have worked at Ford over the years to get us here, and we are so thrilled that you're entering the LGBT movement in such a big, formal, and important way. Now, your grant-making framework is actually economic security and safety. Interesting choice. What does economic security and safety mean, and why did Ford choose those areas?
Well, first of all, I mean, in terms of what it means, economic security and safety, it means that we want for LGBT people to have what everybody else wants, and many people do have. The ability to get a job and stay in a job. I think it's shocking to see a map that shows that, you know, in still over half the states in the country that you can actually be fired just for being gay. To be able to have, you know, the benefit of tax benefits, access to Social Security, to the social safety net, safety, to be able to be safe where you work, where you live, where you learn, and even when you're incarcerated. That, you know, as much progress as we've made on LGBT issues, there are real challenges that people are facing. I know there was some discussion earlier about poverty in the LGBT community. And people really still do face real intimidation, harassment, and even death. And so for us, those are the core fundamental things that we want for LGBT people, and it's why we adopted an economic security and safety frame.
So what? Tell me then, what does a portfolio in that of grants and that look like? Can you pick an area of immigration reform or homelessness or youth safety, and tell us sort of how do you focus? We have this amazing document here, which is, probably 1/10 of what it could be in the number of groups that are working on all these different issues. And so a lot of questions that I get about going broad into these deeper, more systemic issues is, where do you choose? How do you focus? How do you think about it? Do you have any advice for donors about that and how Ford thinks about it?
Well, let me say a couple of things about that. And also going back to the question about sort of why we chose economic security and safety. We did that both because of the fact that those are critical areas of need, where we thought we could add value. We also felt that as a multi-issue social justice funder, it would allow us to work on issues that affect the poorest and most marginalized. That's our focus in all communities, but also in the LGBT community. But we also did it because we thought it would allow us to do three things simultaneously. One is to strengthen the LGBT movement on its own terms. Second, to be able to build a broader, stronger, progressive community. And third, to be able to bring other funders to the LGBT cause.
So say more about that.
And so I say that because I'll give you a couple of examples. One is in taking one of the examples that you were giving. So take, for example, a school safety issue or even economic security. The way that we've addressed that issue in terms of being able to strengthen the LGBT movement on its own terms is to be able to obviously work with the full diversity of the LGBT community, harness the energy, the engagement of the full diversity of the community, strengthen organizations that represent the full diversity of the community. Also be able to work with core institutions like, for example, the Williams Institute to produce a report on poverty in the LGBT community, which I know you saw earlier. So that kind of grant making allows us to strengthen really the core infrastructure of the LGBT movement. At the same time, being able to engage, for example, with other funders and other constituencies on an issue like paid sick days. Not necessarily thought of as an LGBT issue, but at Ford, for example, we have a program that has a whole effort, campaigns across the country around paid sick days. Paid sick days impact LGBT people, and the progressive movement is stronger if the LGBT community sees itself in that issue. So one of the things that we've done is joined with the funders who are funding paid sick days to be able to incorporate an LGBT lens in the work that they're doing, but also to bring organizations like, for example, Equality Florida to a table in Florida that's working on paid sick days. And so it allows us to be able to strengthen individual LGBT organizations, to be able to build a broader, more diverse, stronger, progressive movement, because you have everybody involved around an issue that impacts broadly many communities, and then also bring non-LGBT funders to the LGBT cause.
So tell me, we only have about 5 more minutes, but let me sort of shift here. We're about to hear some really inspiring leaders and donors on some of these very, very tough issues. Progress on a lot of these issues really require our movement to have much more engagement with other broader social issues because of the definition of the problem and the solution to the problem. But also involves a lot more work with government and the public sector, whether that's research, data collection, public funding for services and care, changing rules and regulations, government forms, and then training whole systems on cultural competency to even know how to deal with an LGBT person, couple, or family. How do you sort of think about the work ahead in implementing some of these laws that we're now getting passed? And how should donors sort of be looking at organizations and programs that maybe address one or more of these? Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is an area that is just exploding, and the opportunities are enormous. We've got an office in DC. Obviously, many organization leaders are here, have offices in DC. The policy piece of things that we can accomplish where you don't need Congress or you don't need even the executive is just unbelievable. So you get the changes we were able to get at HUD, implementation around HHS changes, Bureau of Prisons and rape elimination. I mean, we now have appointed in a myriad of agencies folks who share the vision we share, where we can really see, enormous positive changes. And I think, the donors, and I would look at this, should really look at, if this is an area that you're interested in, where are organizations intersecting with these federal agencies? Who do they know? What changes are they getting? What are they seeing down the road? What's ahead of the curve? I mean, the thing that we're looking at, along with many other organizations, I mean, obviously, when I say we, I'm really using the Queen's we. There are lots of organizations doing so much of this work, is going to be around both Affordable Care Act implementation and implementation of whatever comprehensive immigration reform we're going to get. I mean, the implementation piece, and we're seeing this also in the state work that we're doing, it's not just enough. It used to be that you would declare victory if you got a bill passed. If you win a piece of formal legal equality, you put that stake in the ground and you're like, man, that was hard. I'm so glad that's done. That is just the beginning. Now what you have to do is you have to make sure that the people who have to be in charge of making sure that that change is felt on the ground understand how to implement it, have the tools they need, have the resources they need. And that's going to be a huge piece of the work going forward around some of these big key pieces where LGBT people are going to be very much embedded in these big changes like ACA and immigration reform.
The only thing I'd add to what Kate's saying, which is all exactly right, is that I think from a funder perspective, and especially sort of for us in terms of our experience at Ford doing social justice work over, over 75 years, is that you have to be willing to do the not sexy and take the long view. The implementation piece is not sexy. It's not winning the court case. It's not getting to go sit in the Supreme Court and watch the oral argument and then declare victory afterwards and, kind of say I've done that and then go home. The implementation piece is huge, whether you're talking about regulations that interpret a law once the law has been passed and making sure that those regulations, it's the brilliance that Gill and others had in establishing the federal agencies project, which we immediately joined, to make sure that regulations actually are implemented in a way that changes people's lives. You have to train people. It's not sexy to do training for doctors, for teachers, but you can have laws on the books, but if you don't have that training, nothing changes in people's lives. And you really do have to take the long view, because we're sitting here this year, 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, and we're still fighting for equal pay for women, and we are facing the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and we're all fearing what's going to happen in the Supreme Court case that's going to come down later this summer. And so you really have to stay in it for the long term, because you've got to implement the laws once they get on the books, and you've got to be ready, for those pesky opponents that were talked about in the earlier panel, who are constantly going to be fighting to pull back any gains that we make. And so you've got to do the not sexy and take the long view.
One other thing I'd add is we are at this amazing point where we are changing so many federal agencies, are just opening up, particularly in this second term of the Obama administration, just across the board, whether it's the Department of Justice or HUD or HHS. And when you look at the ability of us to finally have, for instance, a national senior resource center, an LGBT resource center that Michael Adams and Sage and those incredible advocates have pushed for so long. And now, they can do training all across the country, but it takes money. I mean, the government will help you with that, but as usual, they don't give you all you need in any way, shape, or form. The demand is totally pent up, and we also have to build all the local infrastructure, right, from the ground up. It's like that vertical integration from where people live in our communities, where they access services, kind of all the way up to the state and regional level, all the way up to Washington. And each of those require some amount of sort of infrastructure in there in order to do, whether it's, training or watchdog work, and a lot of it is very technical. I mean, a lot of these things we're talking about require a knowledge of a system that just, so your average citizen advocate can do a lot, but at some point you get a little lost in what does the healthcare benefit plan look like in the state of Colorado? That's not easy stuff to do. So I want to just sort of put a plug in for, building that capacity, particularly at the local and state level to take advantage of. Again, we're getting some great traction in the federal government, but what happens to it when it hits the local level?
You know, Tim, the only thing I want to say about that, and it goes back to the question about resources and, you know, strategy and thinking about how you deal with some of the most pressing issues in the LGBT community, how you bring other funders to the LGBT cause, the broader progressive movement, is we also have to really, I think, deepen our work on alliance building between different communities. I know there's going to be a whole series of conversations following us that will speak to that, exciting efforts that are underway. But we're strategically investing in our grant-making strategy in alliance building. And just, you know, to take the aging, you just gave an example of aging. It shouldn't just be LGBT elders who are worried about whether or not the laws and the rules, you know, get implemented and that the infrastructure is there. Obviously, there are a whole, you know, variety of seniors who are worrying about aging issues. We're working with an organization like Atlantic Philanthropies, for example, to be able to coordinate and see issues around aging as also encompassing LGBT people, resources that would go to aging issues, going to aging issues related to LGBT people. And I say that only because I think that when we think about the world of resources that are, you know, there to build that kind of infrastructure, build that kind of capacity, but also have the collective, you know, power to make sure that these things get implemented at different levels, we have to think about the LGBT community, but also the LGBT community as connected to broader communities that also will be struggling with these very same kinds of implementation issues. And the more that we can make those connections, the more likely that when the, you know, rubber meets the road and we're trying to do things around implementation and looking for resources, there are more people there than just any single community.
So let's launch our advocate and donor duos. It's my honor to introduce Jeffrey Winder, the Senior Manager for Racial and Economic Justice at the Gay Straight Alliance Network, and Ryan Pedlow, Chairman of the Board of the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network.